376 CE. 8-year-old Alaric watches his world burn. Huns are slaughtering their way across the steppes, and his Gothic tribe is fleeing toward the Danube River and the Roman Empire. His father kneels before Roman officials, begging for asylum. "We'll serve your armies, pay your taxes, just let us cross." The Romans smile. They see opportunity. Within 34 years, that refugee boy will lead 40,000 warriors through Rome's gates, shattering 8 centuries of invincibility. This isn't about barbarian rage, it's about how Rome created its own destroyer. By the end of this video, you'll understand how corrupt officials turned desperate immigrants into an unstoppable enemy, and how elite arrogance triggered the most devastating psychological blow in Roman history. This is the story of the day Rome died. The Romans let 200,000 Gothic refugees cross the Danube. They'd been promised food, temporary shelter, and land to settle. Instead, Roman officials Lupicinus and Maximus saw profit, not people. They sold starving refugees rotten dog meat at inflated prices. When families couldn't pay, the Romans made their infamous offer: "Give us your children, and we'll give you food."
Picture young Alaric watching Gothic parents surrender their sons and daughters to Roman slave traders. Children torn from their mother's arms because a moldy loaf of bread cost more than most families possessed. Sound familiar? When governments betray the trust of desperate people seeking safety, they don't just create victims, they create enemies with nothing left to lose. 2 years later, that rage erupted at Adrianople. Emperor Valens marched north with 60,000 Roman soldiers, confident his professional legions could crush another barbarian uprising. What could desperate refugees possibly do against Rome's military machine? Valens was about to learn the hard way. The battle began with Roman cavalry charging the Gothic lines. For a moment, it looked like another easy Roman victory. Then everything went wrong. The Gothic heavy cavalry, massive warriors on armored war horses, smashed into the Roman flank like a steel avalanche. Roman formations, trained for disciplined fighting, shattered under the impact. Soldiers who'd never seen defeat suddenly found themselves surrounded, cut off, dying in the mud. Emperor Valens himself, the man who'd approved the refugee betrayal, tried to rally his troops. A Gothic spear took him down. As he fell, 25,000 Roman soldiers died with him, Rome's worst military disaster since Hannibal crushed them at Cannae. But here's what made this victory terrifying for Rome. It wasn't won by savage berserkers screaming war cries. It was won by tactical brilliance. Leading that devastating cavalry charge was Alaric, now 24, and transformed from refugee child into a military genius. This wasn't some barbarian warlord Romans could intimidate or buy off. Alaric spoke perfect Latin, understood Roman politics, and had spent his entire adult life studying their military tactics. He knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their fears. He was their equal in every way that mattered, except he had 40,000 warriors who remembered what Rome had done to their families.
After Adrianople, Rome tried what they always did with barbarian leaders: control through manipulation and betrayal. But Alaric was different. Every broken promise only made him stronger, smarter, more dangerous. 397 CE. Emperor Arcadius promises Alaric control of eastern Illyria as reward for military service. Alaric arrives to claim his province, and finds Roman troops waiting to ambush him instead. The message was clear: you're still just a barbarian to us. 401 CE. Emperor Honorius desperately needs Alaric's warriors to fight other barbarian tribes threatening Italy. Alaric delivers victory after victory. When the campaign ends, Honorius refuses to pay the promised gold. Thanks for the help. Now get lost. 405 CE. Romans promise Gothic families permanent settlement rights in exchange for military service. The families are relocated to disease-infested swamps where hundreds die from malaria and starvation. When Alaric demands better land, Roman officials laugh in his face. Each betrayal was a lesson in Roman character. These weren't honorable enemies who'd respect strength or keep their word. These were predators who saw Goths as useful animals, never equals, never partners, always expendable. By 408 CE, Alaric had learned everything he needed to know about Roman honor. He marched his army into Italy with one final offer: give the Gothic people a permanent homeland within the empire, or watch your capital burn. Rome chose pride over survival.
The Eternal City in 410 CE was still the largest in the world. Over 1 million people lived behind walls that hadn't been breached by foreign enemies for 8 centuries. The Romans felt invincible behind those stones. But Alaric knew something they'd forgotten. Walls are only as strong as the people defending them. He didn't waste lives on futile assaults. Instead, he used Rome's greatest weakness against them: their dependence on imported food. Alaric's warriors surrounded the city and cut off every supply route. No grain ships from Egypt, no supply wagons from Gaul, nothing. Within weeks, the mighty capital was starving. Grain prices exploded to 50 times normal levels. The wealthy senators who'd laughed at Gothic demands were now hoarding moldy bread like gold. In the streets, commoners collapsed from hunger. Reports speak of cannibalism, of parents eating their own children to survive. The same Romans who'd forced Gothic parents to trade children for food were now facing the same horrific choice. 3 times, Roman delegations crawled out of their starving city to negotiate with the barbarian king they'd spent decades betraying. But these weren't negotiations between equals. They were surrender talks, and everyone knew it.
First delegation arrives with wagons of gold. Name your price, Alaric. We'll make you the richest man alive. Alaric doesn't even look at the treasure. I don't want your gold. I want what I've always wanted: land for my people to live in peace. Second delegation offers titles and honors. We'll make you a Roman general with senatorial rank, official recognition, permanent status. Alaric laughs, not with humor, but with bitter understanding. I've been promised titles before. Roman words mean nothing. You had 30 years to treat us with respect. That time is over. Third delegation, desperate now, offers tribute payments. We'll pay you every year, whatever you want. Just leave Rome intact. Alaric's response makes his position crystal clear. You still don't understand. This isn't about money or titles or tribute. This is about survival. For 30 years, you've treated my people like animals. Now you'll discover what happens when animals refuse to stay in their cages. The Romans had offered everything except what Alaric actually wanted: genuine respect for his people as equals deserving of security and dignity.
On the night of August 24th, 410 CE, someone inside Rome opened the Salarian Gate. To this day, historians debate who, Gothic slaves already in the city, or Roman senators who'd finally realized their own government was too corrupt and incompetent to save them. At dawn, Gothic warriors poured through the breach like a dam bursting. For the first time in 800 years, foreign enemies walked the streets of Rome as conquerors. But what happened next shattered every stereotype about barbarian savagery. Alaric was a Christian, and his first order was to spare the major churches. Gothic warriors, these supposedly uncivilized brutes, actually escorted terrified Roman civilians to safety in St. Peter's Basilica. They protected women and children while systematically hunting down their real targets. This wasn't random destruction, this was justice with a target list. The palace of Senator Symmachus, who'd called Goths subhuman animals unworthy of Roman soil, burned to the ground while Symmachus watched his life's wealth loaded onto Gothic wagons. The villa of Petronius, who'd laughed when Gothic children were sold into slavery 30 years earlier, stripped bare of every precious thing, its owner forced to beg for scraps, like the refugees he'd once mocked. The mansion of Flavius, who'd personally broken 3 separate treaties with Gothic tribes, reduced to ash and rubble, a message that broken promises have consequences. For 3 days, the Goths took what they wanted: mountains of gold, silver artwork, silk tapestries, jeweled weapons. Centuries of wealth Rome had extracted from conquered provinces, now loaded onto Gothic wagons. But they took something far more valuable than treasure. They took Rome's aura of invincibility. Word of the eternal city's fall spread across the empire like wildfire. If Rome itself, the heart of civilization, the undefeated capital of the world, could be humiliated and stripped by the very people it had betrayed, then nothing was permanent. No walls were strong enough, no treaties were binding enough, no empire was eternal enough.
In North Africa, St. Augustine wrote, "If Rome can perish, what cannot?" In Gaul, Roman governors began making secret deals with local barbarian tribes. In Britain, Roman legions started planning their own survival rather than defending distant provinces. The psychological shockwave was devastating. Alaric had accomplished something no Carthaginian general, no Gallic chieftain, no Persian king had ever managed. He'd proven that Rome could bleed. After 3 days of methodical revenge, Alaric led his people out of Rome, their wagons groaning under the weight of Roman gold. But despite his triumph, the homeland he'd fought his entire life to secure remained elusive. Death claimed him first. Just months later, while marching through southern Italy, fever struck down the man who'd humbled an empire. His warriors buried him in a riverbed with his treasure, then diverted the water back to hide his grave from Roman vengeance. Alaric died without seeing his people find the permanent home they deserved. But his legacy was already reshaping the world.
Every barbarian leader across Europe had learned the lesson. Rome could be beaten. The empire that called itself eternal was mortal, after all. Within 70 years, the Western Roman Empire would collapse entirely, torn apart by the very peoples it had exploited and betrayed. The real tragedy is how easily this catastrophe could have been avoided. If Rome had simply honored its original promises to desperate refugees, if corrupt officials had shown basic human decency instead of seeing profit in human misery, if the empire had adapted to changing times instead of clinging to outdated arrogance, Alaric might have died as Rome's greatest defender instead of its destroyer.
But Alaric's revenge was just the beginning of Rome's nightmare. In our next episode,
We'll see how another barbarian genius learned from his example, not just sacking Rome once, but building an entire empire from Roman ruins and turning the Mediterranean into his personal lake. The Vandals didn't just steal Rome's wealth, they hijacked the empire's entire food supply and weaponized it against them. It's the most audacious economic warfare in ancient history, and it starts with outcasts who could barely read becoming the masters of naval combat. Subscribe now so you don't miss how desperate migrants became Mediterranean kings and how one brilliant barbarian strategist figured out how to make Rome starve itself to death.